Before we dive in, drop a quick hi in the comments. It may seem small, but trust me, it really helps YouTube share this story with more sci-fi fans like us. I'd love to see who's watching. Across the upper deck of the diplomatic vessel Seraphine, conversations faltered. Status indicators along corridor walls blinked amber, then crimson. A low tremor rolled through the bulkhead. Crew members paused mid-step. One of the junior aides, a Bavoran named Cossack, muttered something in his native tongue as his eye stalks contracted. Seconds later, compartment seals slid shut with a mechanical hiss. The ceiling lights flickered once, then went dark. In her private quarters, Counselor Elara Mean didn't flinch at the sudden blackout. She had already expected it. She stood alone beneath the dull glow of a backup panel, its emergency diode painting the room in pulsing red. On the table before her, a holopad flickered with a dossier, decrypted files from the Directorate of Human Intelligence. Elara scrolled with 2 fingers, her expression tight, controlled. Her hands trembled only when she stopped reading. Target probabilities, route interdictions, systemic vote influence, Threx kill patterns. They knew. The Kator expansion route had been the spark. Months ago, the Central Council proposed armed convoys through the quadrant, justified as a deterrent against piracy. Elara had been the lone dissenter. She'd stood, solitary, in a chamber of thousands, and voted no. Not for the sake of contrarianism, but because she saw what others refused to admit. Military escalation there would ignite conflicts that hadn't yet begun. That vote had cost her support, then allies, then contracts. Quiet threats started following her after that. Now the storm had arrived. A soft chime echoed from the wall. The door to her quarters slid open. A tall human stepped through, silent, broad-shouldered, dressed in standard patrol fatigues stripped of insignia. Grey Saban. He didn't salute, didn't acknowledge her with a nod. He simply entered and paused, scanning the room. She had seen his file. The man who shouldn't have existed, let alone worn a uniform again. Elara stepped back slightly, just enough for the tension in her spine to become visible. Not fear, preparation. Saban turned his head slightly, listening. Somewhere far down the corridor, a metallic shriek rang out. A bulkhead being breached. No alarms triggered, no alert sounded. Of course not. The infiltration left no trace. From the report, she knew how it would happen. A Threx infiltration cell, bred for assassination and tactical insertion. No genetic baseline matched theirs. No one negotiated with them. They accepted payment in rare isotopes and silence. If the data was correct, 20 had boarded the Seraphine, and now the lights were gone. The systems were quiet. The ship had become a tomb waiting to be filled. Saban moved without cue. He walked to a control panel and tapped in a manual override. A hidden drawer slid open beneath the communications console, revealing a matte black communicator. Military issue, analog interface, resistant to disruption. He handed it to her. "In case you need to talk," he said. His voice was flat, deliberate, almost cold. She took it carefully, its weight disproportionate to its size. Not just a tool, a contract. "Are you staying here with me?" Saban's expression didn't shift. His gaze tracked the faint vibrations in the wall. His fingers flexed once, slow, methodical, like a reset before violence. "No," he said. "It's easier to hunt them than to protect you." He looked back at her, only briefly. "I'll be back. Leave the channel open." Then he was gone. 15 minutes earlier, the infiltration began. 3 Threx breached the exterior hull near the maintenance sector. 2 more entered through vent shafts from an unauthorized cargo pod attached beneath the Seraphine's central spine. Its docking logs had been scrubbed. Another 5 jettisoned in pairs from a disguised patrol vessel hours earlier and had been drifting in cold sleep along the ship's trajectory, reactivating only when proximity hit 1 kilometer. No alarms sounded. The Seraphine's crew was diplomatic, not military. Civilian officers, aides, interspecies linguists, logistical technicians. Their security contingent comprised 8 personnel, none of whom made it past the second corridor. Internal cams blinked to static one by one. In under 6 minutes, 18 sectors were sealed, life support rerouted, navigation frozen, communications jammed. Threx moved like phantoms, 6-limbed, vertebrae reinforced with reactive cartilage, skin capable of shifting hues within milliseconds. Each operated with personal directives, but trained for synchronized suppression. Most carried carbon edge blades, embedded beneath forearm armor, retractable and silent. One of the first to die was Ambassador Hask, a Torvalian negotiator. His throat was slit before he could scream. Others were left breathing, sealed in containment pods, panicked and pounding. No noise, no mercy. In the reinforced diplomatic chamber near the heart of the ship, Ilera crouched beside a hidden panel, watching the heat map of the ship's corridors. No central systems were operational now, but the analog sensors, installed decades ago for redundancy, still provided minimal thermal readings. Movement shimmered faintly across the corridors, too fluid, too deliberate. Not ghosts, hunters. Sabin hadn't returned yet. She knew he wouldn't, not until it was done. Weeks before, Ilera had sat across from General Matthew Craig in the depths of the Human Defense Enclave beneath the Lunar Security Directorate. The walls were steel, unpolished, the air recycled and dry. He hadn't asked her permission, he had informed her. "They'll send the Threx," Craig had said. "We'll let them come." She nodded and watched as he keyed up the dossier. Sabin's profile loaded. Classified notation, combat psychometrics, service record, augmentation denials, kill counts, blacked out. Reinstatement date, null. "This man," Craig had said, "wasn't selected for diplomacy. He's what we put in dark places when we want them darker still." Ilera had hesitated, not out of doubt, but from the sheer gravity of the choice. She hadn't volunteered for war, but she had voted her conscience, and that came with consequences. "If I do this," she asked, "and he fails?" "He won't." Craig didn't blink when he said it. He didn't need her approval, only her consent. That had been the end of it. Now in the dim shelter beneath the collapsed vent near the life support access tunnel, she felt her own pulse rise as the console beside her clicked once. An audio blip. It wasn't Sabin's channel. It was unsecured, barely a whisper, possibly a glitch. Then she heard it again. Not a message, a footstep. She glanced upward, at the faint seam in the wall where an overhead duct met the bulkhead. The dust had shifted. Ilera crawled to the far wall and keyed in a manual override for the secondary blast doors. Not to open them, but to seal the corridor behind. She wasn't sure if it would slow anything, but it would tell Sabin something. They were already here. Somewhere beyond the walls, something screeched. Metal dragged against metal. A scream followed. Short, choked, then silenced. Probably Varen, the systems tech. He was stationed 2 doors down. Ilera gripped the communicator, holding her breath. Then a soft burst of static. Sabin's voice, barely audible. "I'm close. Don't speak." She didn't. Her finger hovered over the mic, but she obeyed. He didn't ask for status, didn't reassure her. The connection fell silent again, but she didn't deactivate it. On the corridor camera feed, grainy, black and white, Ilera watched one thermal signature flicker and vanish. Another followed. Then nothing moved at all. Ilera muted the feed. She didn't need to see the rest. She just needed him to keep going. Sabin moved like smoke through the half-lit corridor, silent and absolute. A red emergency strip flickered dimly along the floor as he slid beneath a partially open bulkhead, his shoulders barely fitting through the jagged gap. The metallic groan of stressed supports hummed behind him. Ahead, only darkness and stale air. He didn't look back. Ilera was behind sealed pressure doors. The only way to protect her was to make sure nothing survived long enough to find her. Saban stopped at a maintenance terminal embedded in the wall. Dead. But next to it, nestled in a forgotten recess, an analog control junction blinked with faint, erratic power, untouched by digital interference. He pulled a cable from his belt, snapped it into the port, and began the boot-up of a dormant circuit diagnostic grid, long since abandoned by standard engineering crews. The readout was primitive, but it showed what he needed: energy surges from movement sensors still active in the corridor's subfloor. Someone, or something, was passing Sector Delta 3 at irregular intervals. Saban shut the panel and moved. He reached the corridor's corner, where auxiliary conduits met a wall panel, and opened a service hatch. Inside, behind disconnected coolant regulators and rusted emergency beacons, lay a collapsed energizer frame, its shielding cracked, but its core still glowing faintly. He sliced through a bypass filament and wound it through the grating of the floor. Then he waited. Footsteps, clawed, calculated, not human, touched down just outside the corner. Saban flicked a switch on the coil's edge. The coil snapped to life with a bone-jarring crack, blue arcs lashing upward like wild veins of lightning. The Threx jerked once, twice, then screamed through clenched mandibles. The Threx convulsed mid-step, its limbs locking in spasm. Saban stepped from the dark and buried a curved tool beneath the clavicle. 2 precise thrusts, silent as breath. Blood, dark purple and viscous, spread like ink across the floor tiles. He wiped the tool once on the corpse's sleeve and moved on. In the shelter, Alara stared at the analog screen mounted on the backup relay panel. One of the thermal signatures she had been tracking just blinked out. It didn't fade, it vanished. Instantly. A second later, a signal pinged through her console. Not a message. Just a hardline pulse from the communicator Saban had given her. A confirmation. Active, breathing, still hunting. Her hand steadied. Alara switched to the scrambled communication channel she'd been monitoring since the lights went out. The signal was low, fragmented, but enough got through. Alien dialects, rapid, coded. She filtered the feed through a translational subroutine and caught fragments. 5 lost sector breach. Echo pattern changed. Isolate. Confirm presence. They knew they were bleeding. She extracted 3 audio segments and uploaded them back into the communicator's relay band, tagging each with a timestamp and location reference. Saban would receive them on the move. No delay, no confirmation needed. In Sector B7, Saban worked fast. He had pulled down 2 containment panels and wedged them between a hydraulic access shaft and the exposed infrastructure of a vertical air duct. From Engineer Weller's body, slumped near the collapsed bulkhead, he'd retrieved a pressurized line of cleaning vapor. The duct overhead hissed, then roared. Steam flooded upward. 2 Threx, previously suspended in the shaft using adhesion lines, dropped from the tunnel like startled insects, thermal cloaks glitching as heat overwhelmed their sensors. Saban didn't hesitate. He stepped forward with a titanium rod yanked from a collapsed gantry, swung low and fast, bludgeoning the first Threx's knee from the side. As it fell, he shifted his weight, rotated, and drove the sharpened edge of the rod through its chest cavity with brutal efficiency. The second Threx leapt toward him, but Saban was already turning. The rod struck bone with a muted crack. He dropped it, drew his knife, and dragged it cleanly across the exposed neck plating, piercing between protective ridges. The alien thrashed once, then collapsed against the bulkhead, convulsing. Saban straightened. His face was unreadable, but his breath caught, just for a moment. A single exhale, longer than the rest. His hand lingered a half-second too long on the hilt before letting go. Then he turned back to the duct, retrieved the pressure line, and moved on. In the shelter, Alara tracked the noise in her own way. She monitored closed doors, dead cameras, heat shifts. When 2 figures dropped into a corridor that had shown empty just minutes before, and then went cold, she understood. But there was more. The comms picked up another signal, fainter, with an unfamiliar modulation. She leaned forward, isolating the pattern. Something about it was off. A different cadence. deeper vibration. She watched the wave, waited. Then it shifted again. Higher frequency, quieter. Alara cross-referenced it with known Threx implants. The signature matched. Audio assist augmentation, meaning one of them wasn't just tracking visually. He was listening for movement. She leaned to her side console, activated a legacy control unit, and fed a signal through a disconnected ventilation manifold 3 corridors away. The sound of shuffling footsteps echoed faintly in the dark. Sabin heard it too. He dropped low behind an exposed section of piping. His eyes flicked once toward the vent overhead. He knew it was false. A lure. And it worked. The Threx that emerged from the east corridor moved like a mantis, tall, unnaturally slender, its joints bending too far, too smoothly. Its helmet flexed with each motion, antennae twitching as if tasting the air. Its weapon was sheathed. It was listening. Saban didn't move. The creature passed under the hanging bulkhead. That's where Saban struck. He drove forward with a hydraulic spear, improvised from a snapped support rod, pressure tank, and connector plate. The point pierced through the Threx's chest and embedded in the opposite wall. The alien let out a strangled hiss. Saban placed a boot against its back and ripped the spear free with a wet, tearing sound. Blood sprayed across the corridor tiles in a wide arc. Saban stepped back into the shadows, already scanning for the next. In the shelter, Alara stared at the final thermal feed, just static now. She knew what that meant. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. But her fingers moved more confidently across the console. She opened another channel, isolated new traffic, and prepared for the next move. The hunt wasn't over, but Saban wasn't out there alone anymore. He had someone feeding the dark and guiding the blade. Saban ducked into the next junction, just as the pipe above him split open with a hiss. He didn't stop. The escaping vapor clouded behind him as he moved through the utility corridor with practiced momentum, his silhouette vanishing into the shadows before the pressure settled. A faint shimmer in the air trailed him. Wrong, broken light bending subtly. He caught it in a glint from a damaged maintenance mirror bolted to the opposite wall, just for a second. Then gone. Camouflage. He pivoted, dropped to a crouch, and swept the makeshift spear across the corridor. Nothing met resistance. The air was still, too still. Then came the sound, a click of shifting metal just behind him. Saban turned too late. A blade carved a clean diagonal slash across his shoulder, from collarbone to tricep. The edge burned through fabric and flesh alike, hot enough to cauterize on contact, but deep enough to sting with every heartbeat. He hissed through clenched teeth, instinct overriding pain. His left arm dropped lower, weakened. He spun with his full weight, elbow catching something invisible. The Threx decloaked mid-motion. Its skin rippled, scales refracting light in segments that flickered between visible and invisible. Thin, elongated limbs. A curved exomask covering its mouth, venting short hisses of breath. The creature adjusted its stance, blade ready again, optic plates recalibrating to track Saban's movement. Saban stepped back, rolled his shoulder once. The pain flared, but his eyes stayed locked. He feinted right. The Threx lunged. Saban dropped low, kicked out, and drove his forearm into the Threx's sternum. Metal clanged against cartilage. The alien staggered, just enough. Saban seized the moment. He twisted, turned the weight of his body into a forward surge, and slammed the creature against the bulkhead. His knife punched through the exomask and drove into the throat beneath. It gurgled once, then dropped. Saban didn't wait. He reached for his shoulder, fingers brushing the heat of the cut. Blood, his, dripped freely now, running past his elbow. Not lethal, not yet, but deep. He reached for the wall and steadied himself. The communicator buzzed. Alara's interface flashed once. A schematic bloomed across his wrist display. An old section of the ship, service deck forgotten in newer layouts. He hadn't seen it before. A narrow transit shaft bypassing 4 locked-down sectors, connected to a gravity-null maintenance bay. He stared at the data. No questions, no doubt. One tap, Silent acknowledgement. Not protocol, not command, just trust. He found the parts near the remains of Engineer Palek's workstation. Scorched tools, backup cells, a broken pressure lance. He scavenged what he needed. Capacitors, a sharpened grounding spike, a stripped power coupler. It took 3 minutes to build the spear. He loaded the shaft with a recycled energy cell, rigged the coupling to discharge on impact, and insulated the grip with tape melted from a burned emergency medpack. The tip glowed faintly when tested. Ready. Saban moved into the maintenance bay. It was silent, weightless. Gravity here had collapsed entirely, systems fried. Debris floated like wreckage from a sunken station. Tools, containers, the broken frame of a defunct repair drone spinning slowly on its axis. And there, just past the scaffolding, another shimmer. Less subtle now. Heat distortion from a cloaked body moving too fast through the cold. Saban exhaled, kicked off the wall, and launched forward. He twisted through the zero-G space with the spear in hand, adjusting trajectory mid-flight. The Threx turned too late. It had been scanning forward, unaware of the new path. The spear struck center mass. The electric charge surged. The Threx seized, limbs locking as arcs of energy rippled through its armor. The glow lit up the bay in pulses. It floated for a second, frozen, before the convulsions stopped and its body drifted backward, trailing smoke. Saban righted himself with a twist, pulled the spear free, and spun gently to a halt against the far wall. His left arm floated slightly askew, unresponsive. He didn't adjust it. Couldn't. He said nothing, just gritted his teeth and pressed his hand against his bleeding shoulder. His movement slowed now, less fluid. Not from weakness, but from adjustment. The pain would stay. So would the mission. Every motion had to matter. The next Threx died in darkness. The corridor was narrow, barely wider than a man's shoulders. Saban had blocked the far exit with a collapsed ladder and left the entrance slightly ajar. He knelt near the wall, one hand on the pressure switch hidden beneath a floor panel rigged with stripped pipe connectors. He'd coated the ceiling with emergency lubricant, the slick shine invisible unless illuminated directly. He waited. The Threx entered, eyes forward, hunting. It didn't notice the floor change. The slight resistance of the panel, then the pressure trap activated. The ceiling dropped with a mechanical snap. A plated ceiling brace, detached from the maintenance grid above, crashed down at speed, folding the Threx mid-torso. The scream barely started before bone cracked under steel. Saban remained still. He didn't celebrate, just stood, stepped over the body, and moved on. At the ventilation exchange chamber, something was wrong. Saban saw it in the residue on the walls. Spores. Engineered. Not native to the Seraphine systems. Biochemical filaments floated like hair-thin tendrils in the filtered air. Then he found the canister, wedged behind the intake manifold, marked in glyphs used by black market bioweapon traffickers in the Zokari Reach. Neurotoxin, targeted to mammalian central nervous systems. Saban keyed into the ship's emergency override. The fire suppression system kicked on with a hydraulic bang. A red light flashed. Foam flooded the ventilation shaft. The Threx burst from the side wall, having waited. Ambush timing perfect. Saban spun, caught its blade arm before it completed the swing. They grappled, locked in a desperate knot of limbs and impact. The alien's claws scraped across Saban's ribs, cutting through fabric and skin. Saban let the pain sharpen him. He headbutted the Threx once, hard, then dropped and turned, dragging the enemy down with him. As they fell, Saban drove his knife into the base of the creature's skull, just beneath the cranial ridge. It spasmed violently, then stopped. He didn't let go. Not immediately. When he finally did, he sat still for a breath. It wasn't fatigue. It was gravity, of a different kind. The corridor was quiet again. He stood, slower now. One hand pressed against the side of his abdomen, the other gripping the bloody knife. He looked down at the body, then up at the dark ahead. No one was coming to save this ship. He adjusted the blade in his hand. The dark ahead didn't wait. Neither did he. The floor beneath Saban vibrated once, faint, rhythmic, before fading into silence again. He pressed his palm to the grating, feeling the residual pulse from the deck plating. It wasn't from the ship's systems. It was footsteps, light, coordinated, moving in pairs. He drew a deep breath and leaned back against the bulkhead. The cut on his shoulder had dried into a sticky line of pain. The fabric clung to his skin, and every movement tugged the wound open just enough to remind him that he wasn't healing. Not yet. The corridor ahead was quiet. He keyed a silent ping through his wrist unit. In the shelter, Alara leaned over the console just as the comms burst with static, then cleared into fragmented Threx dialects. The voices were lower now, hurried. The word structure had changed, less confident, more reactive. She parsed them fast. Pattern broken, confirmed. Losing operatives in sequence. Unknown variable. Possible adaptive hunter. Her breath hitched. They'd realized. They weren't sweeping anymore. They were watching their own backs. Ilara scrolled deeper, isolating command subcodes embedded in the exchange. One in particular repeated with a slight modulation. An identifier. No, something else. A location marker. Sector Theta 9. She tapped a command into the analog console. It lit up briefly, confirming the relay range. She attached the data and sent it in silence. Saban's display flashed once. He read the line, turned his head, and looked back the way he came. In the remains of a secondary engineering station, the Threx had deployed 3 micro-drones, each no larger than a human eye, covered in semi-reflective plating and emitting near-silent thermal pulses. They darted through the corridors in trios, scanning for heat clusters, movement trails, or unshielded biosigns. Saban watched from the far side of the bay. He crouched beside 2 bodies, crewmen Yarlan and Hetz. Both had died in the first wave, their corpses still warm when he'd arrived. He dragged them closer to the junction and laid them against the side wall, arranging them with the same orientation Threx scouts would expect of fresh casualties. Then he rerouted a line from the auxiliary power manifold. He pressed the exposed copper cabling into the internal mesh of their uniforms. The synthetic fibers conducted just enough to simulate irregular body heat. From the shadows, Saban watched the drones approach, zigzagging, scanning, converging. They hovered above the bodies, pulsing in synchronized intervals. He pulled the trigger. The charge detonated overhead. A thermal pack, overloaded and rigged to a power conduit, blew through the ceiling supports. Shrapnel and steel caved in on the bay. The drones disintegrated instantly. One of the Threx, lurking just behind the entry frame, was caught in the blast, shredded by a support beam that collapsed with a thunderous crack. The second Threx staggered, half covered in debris. It crawled forward, its voice rasping through a damaged breather mask. Saban stepped into view. The Threx froze. It was wounded, forearm shattered, kneeling. Its claws retracted. One hand raised. Fingers splayed, a universal signal. Surrender. Saban raised the weapon. "You knew the target," he said. The Threx didn't answer. Didn't need to. Saban fired once. Clean, deliberate. Judgment, not reaction. He didn't blink. The mission didn't wait. The head snapped back, then slumped forward, smoke curling from the shattered skull. The body collapsed sideways, limp. Saban lowered the weapon. His eyes held the corpse for a second, no longer. Then he walked past it without a word. In the shelter, Alara stared at the console, unblinking. Her screen still glowed with the thermal readouts she'd sent minutes ago. Now they were gone, overwritten by new static. She replayed the transmission, watched the telemetry fade, and then she heard the shot, distant, faint, but real. She reached for the terminal to adjust the feed and froze. Her fingers hovered for a moment, then slowly continued. She didn't flinch. But her touch was harder now, her movements more rigid. Her eyes flicked once toward the structural overlay, She blinked rapidly and returned to work. The screen updated. New signal. 2 Threx, both transmitting with compression tags she hadn't seen before. She ran a translation sweep. The command string repeated twice. Redirect to containment. Energy sector compromised. Breach threat level critical. Alara narrowed her eyes. She sent it to Saban immediately. Containment was 5 decks below. Saban didn't take the elevator. He climbed through maintenance shafts, dropping between rungs like a shadow through a cage. His shoulder burned. His side bled. Neither stopped him. He reached the access corridor and crouched at the corner. One of the Threx was already at the door, tall, plated in matte black exo-armor. Its rear limbs fused into a reinforced tail for balance and torque. It keyed a sequence into the panel, claws moving fast, bypassing the encryption. The other stood guard, eyes sweeping the hall. It looked down the corridor and saw Saban. It opened its mouth to call out. He shot it through the face. The second Threx jerked and turned. The override finished. The door hissed open. Saban rushed forward, sprinting low. The Threx stepped back into the chamber, trying to seal the door behind it. Saban hurled his knife. The blade hit just beneath the arm, between armor plates. The Threx reeled and reached for the handle embedded in its ribcage. Saban reached the doorway and slammed the door control. It surged. He'd already redirected energy from the emergency grid. The override circuit, uninsulated, pushed raw current through the frame. The door flared bright. The Threx screamed. Its arms flailed as its body lit from the inside, armor glowing, tissue boiling beneath. It didn't fall. Saban stepped in. The creature still moved. Barely. He grabbed the scorched throat, yanked the head down, and drove his knee into the alien's jaw. Bone shattered. It dropped without another sound. Saban stood over the body. Smoke still drifted from its armor. His knife hung at his side, stained, dark, and dripping. His jaw clenched once, then relaxed. No pause longer than necessary. He turned, limped to the wall, and leaned for a second. Just a second. The breath left. The pain stayed. The blade came up again, and he kept going. A hiss from above. Then the ceiling buckled. Saban threw himself backward just as a serrated blade scorched the air where his head had been. He hit the floor hard, rolled, came up on one knee. His breath caught. The corridor flickered with emergency strobe, red, white, red, casting the moving shapes into jagged silhouettes. 3 of them. The Threx had changed formation. They weren't moving in isolation anymore. They flowed together, overlapping fields of vision, one drawing fire while the others circled. Their armor bore adaptive slats along the chest and forearms, heat-venting ridges that shimmered with internal pulses. Coordination, updated. The lead one stepped forward, raising a long, curved weapon, not a blade, not quite. Plasma-honed, flat, glowing orange with residual energy. A heat scythe, untraceable to standard scanners, unblockable with metal. Saban dove to the left, but the Threx was faster this time. The edge caught his right side, slicing deep from lower ribs to spine. The impact didn't cauterize. It burned through. His vision blurred. He slammed a fist against the wall, once, hard. The pain didn't answer. The rage didn't help. But the motion gave him just enough. He twisted and fired. The shot clipped the rear Threx, just enough to stagger it. The third lunged forward in response, but the leader raised one hand, a signal. Regroup. They pulled back. Calculated. Saban dragged himself into the next hatch, sealed it behind him, and collapsed in the narrow space between service walls. His fingers trembled as he tore open a patch kit, spraying sealant foam into the wound. The hiss drowned out his breathing. His blood steamed against the alloy floor. He forced himself up. Somewhere, air was moving. Saban staggered to the side and keyed a sequence into the access console. The purification system roared to life, a deep, mechanical suction that vibrated through the ducts. He popped the panel and pulled himself into the shaft. It was narrow, cold, but it moved. Airflow carried him through bends, past filter grates, around rusted corners where insulation had burned away. Each breath dragged pain through his ribcage, but his arm, when it moved, was slower. His leg trembled when he kicked into the next section. He emerged 2 decks below, tumbling out into a shadowed alcove. He didn't rise immediately. He crawled, found a beam, pressed his back against it and sat there, chest rising like it had weight. Ilera saw it. She watched the thermal feed drop, then flicker, then rise again erratic. The tracker on his biosignal was skewed, movement patterns stuttered, directionless. He was bleeding badly. She tapped into secondary controls. The ship's graviton flow systems were offline in several sections, but emergency redirection protocols remained. She rerouted the mass regulator in Corridor Gamma 6, lowered the gravity to give him a partial boost if he passed through. Then Sector Lambda 2 amplified it, made the corridor denser, harder to traverse, a trap for anything following him. One corridor became frictionless, another became weight. She reshaped the battlefield without stepping onto it. The system warned her. Unauthorized override. She dismissed it, reassigned power, shut down stability protocols in non-essential zones. Then she sent a message. No encryption, just text. You still there? For a long second, nothing. Then, until the last one. No delay, no doubt. Just 2 signals, locked. She paused, only for a breath, then keyed the next relay. Near the engineering sector, Sabin gritted his teeth as he limped along the scaffolding. The pain was dull now, deep, moved past sharp. His hand stayed on the wall. His breath came shallow. He caught movement to his left. Fast. Too fast. A Threx sprinted along the ceiling, inverted, using magnetic limbs to cling. This one was different, smaller, with ridged shoulders and auxiliary vents along the back. Recon model. It veered toward the coolant core. Sabin moved. He climbed the ladder manually, each step a jolt, reached the top, opened the coolant valve. It resisted. Mechanical lock fused. He forced it, punched the override. The lock broke free with a loud metallic crack. Coolant hissed into the chamber. Liquid nitrogen compressed through fractured valves. The air turned white. The Threx hesitated, slid. Its claws couldn't grip the frost. Sabin stepped forward and kicked a toolbox into the center of the spill. The Threx looked up, too late. He dropped a wrench, metal core, flat edge. It hit the toolbox and sparked. The gas ignited. The blast was controlled, focused, contained in the corridor. But the Threx's exo-armor splintered like ice under pressure. Its limbs detached in pieces. The heat from the explosion melted the nitrogen residue into mist. Sabin coughed, waved it aside, moved on. Another alert hit Ilera's console. A different pattern. This Threx was heavier, bulkier, with spider-like legs, jointed in 4 places, with vibrating spines along the femurs. Its movement was chaotic, fast, unpredictable. It moved through shaft intersections too narrow for most, climbing vertically and darting between pressure flanges. She ran a scan, cross-referenced weight distribution and power draw from nearby sectors. One zone had a maintenance cavity beneath it. Old repair site. No gravity stabilizers. Unsecured panel. She highlighted it. Sabin saw it ping on his HUD. He waited above the shaft. The Threx didn't hesitate. It dropped in fast, claws spinning for purchase, legs flicking against metal supports. Sabin had already placed the charge. He triggered it as the Threx hit the floor. The blast wasn't large, just directional. Enough to rupture the spine where the plates met. The creature convulsed, legs folding inward, impaling itself on the support struts below. It didn't scream. It twitched, then fell still. Sabin stood at the top edge, one hand pressed to the bleeding line beneath his ribs. His eyes narrowed. Not in pain, in focus. One more down. The blood cooled. The heat faded. But nothing in the dark stayed still for long. The floor tilted. Just a few degrees, barely noticeable, but enough to shift the debris at Sabin's feet. He stepped forward, limping slightly, as the lights overhead flickered in an irregular pattern. The emergency grid was failing. One sector at a time, the Seraphine was collapsing into power starvation, blown conduits, and unpredictable gravity distortions. He paused at the junction between decks Kappa 4 and MU2. The bulkhead door ahead had warped, bent inward by internal pressure or explosion shockwave. Hard to tell. He adjusted his grip on the side railing and pulled himself forward. The HUD in his visor flickered again. Partial data, intermittent readings. He blinked twice to reset the feed. Only 5 contact markers remained on screen. Ghost signatures. 7 Threx left. No way to know which had regrouped or where. Behind him, the corridor groaned. Saban moved forward. Elira scanned the structural map. The center of Deck 3 was marked by an unstable gravity field, collapsed stabilization rings, and a power sinkhole. But life support was still online. She rerouted soft lighting into the sector and flagged the chamber on Saban's HUD. Then she listened. The Threx weren't speaking openly anymore, but short bursts of code still pinged across the narrowband relay. She caught 2 signals converging. They were moving together. She opened an intercom node and played a low-pulse frequency through a forgotten maintenance duct 3 meters from the collapsed gravity field. It echoed like idle systems rebooting. Unthreatening, familiar, a lure. 2 heat signatures changed trajectory. She leaned closer to the terminal. Sabin crouched on a raised platform overlooking the chamber. The air here was strange, dense near the ceiling, light near the floor. His body floated slightly, then dropped, then rose again with every breath. No noise, no weight, no time. Movement. The first Threx stepped in, thin, masked in dense body wrap. Not armor, not shielding. A manto, thermal dampening mesh, reflective, coded to deflect basic motion and biosign scans. It slid like liquid, its gait low and smooth, claws brushing against the floor in silent rhythm. Sabin's HUD didn't show it, but the dust on the ground, light as it was, flattened beneath invisible feet. Sabin watched, waited. He gripped a segment of detached ventilation tubing in both hands. He counted the pressure shifts in the plating. 3 steps. 2. He stood, hurled the tube. It hit nothing mid-air. Then something snapped. The Threx staggered into visibility, cloak shivering like water being boiled. Sabin moved fast, pulled the second tube from his belt and rammed it forward. It connected hard, against shoulder, against throat, then again. He pinned the Threx to the sloped floor, wrenching the blade from its side, drove it back into the torso. He hesitated. A breath's worth. Enough to remember this one had a name. Then pushed. The creature convulsed once, then stopped. Sabin dropped the weapon. His breath came in rasps. The next movement took effort. He stood slower. When he turned, the second Threx was already gone, vanished into the dark. Elira saw it in the motion data. Sabin's rhythm changed. He wasn't cycling between sectors the same way. His timing slipped. His patterns broke. She rerouted all atmospheric pressure from sectors adjacent to his position, forcing the Threx to follow paths she could control. She sealed 6 access hatches, blocked 2 ladders, narrowed the hunt. If he was slowing, she would force the game into his terms. Deck Epsilon 9. Saban limped into the pressurization bay, trailing smoke from a scorched glove. His breathing sounded like it was filtered through gravel. He crossed the chamber and froze. 1 Threx was already at the evac terminal. It had triggered the emergency override. Saban moved. Quiet, efficient. He passed between shadows, slipping beneath support pipes. He reached the edge of the console just as the vacuum alert blinked red. A whine rose, then roared. Air sucked sideways. The chamber pressure collapsed. Sabin launched himself toward the closest service hatch and slammed the locking bar down. It resisted. Manual override had been disabled. The Threx at the console turned, saw him struggling. It moved fast, blade ready. Sabin pressed his burned palm against the emergency release. Nothing. The hatch vibrated, shaking loose from its frame. He looked at his hand. Then, without hesitation, jammed it into the thermal port, flesh against the backup filament. The heat seared instantly. His skin bubbled, but the circuit closed. The lock released. He yanked the hatch open and slammed it shut behind him, just as the pressure behind him dropped to vacuum. The Threx, caught in the blast zone, was hurled against the far wall, neck twisting unnaturally. It didn't get up. Sabin collapsed against the sealed door. He didn't scream, but his hand shook violently. He wrapped it in gauze without looking. His breathing was shallow now, his eyes dimmer. He leaned his head back, stared at the dark ceiling above him, and whispered, just once, "Focus." Even that cost him. Breath. Blood. Memory. Then he pulled himself upright. Ilera stared at the command overlay. His beacon was still online, but his vitals, readable only through analog fluctuations, spiked, then flatlined, then resumed irregular. She locked every access point around him, let the perimeter stabilize. Sabin was bleeding, limping, slower, but still moving, because 6 Threx still thought they had a chance. A klaxon howled overhead, distorted, looping. Sabin shoved his weight into the bulkhead door until it sealed behind him, cutting off the shriek. The quiet that followed wasn't silence. It was pressure, metallic groans, panels shifting, floor plating vibrating under strain. The Seraphine was bleeding out from inside. He blinked sweat out of his eyes and checked his HUD, flickering. 5 Threx signatures, indistinct and shifting. Ilera had routed him a new path 20 minutes earlier. Since then, nothing. He moved. A Threx stood alone in Equalization Chamber 7, tall, hunched, covered in matte black carapace and pulsing implants across its back. It was scanning the room, clicking softly through its mouth array, processing echo feedback from the chamber walls. Sabin had been trailing it for 3 corridors. He circled to the outer maintenance panel and began manually diverting oxygen from the chamber to the atmospheric processor. Equalization valves shifted, pressure normalized. The Threx didn't notice. It kept scanning until the inner hatch hissed closed. Sabin pulled the internal bypass lever. The chamber sealed. He dropped a hand to the control node and forced a pressure spike through the core pipe. The inner valve screamed, then imploded. The chamber bent inward with a thunderous crunch, cracking the reinforced wall with an echo like a snapped femur. The Threx inside didn't scream, just collapsed against the imploded wall, its limbs crushed inward. Sabin didn't stay to watch it die. He turned and ran. He cut through a crawl space 2 decks down, climbed a twisted ladder, and emerged inside an access corridor barely 2 meters wide. Half the lights were out. The rest flickered yellow. Dust floated sideways, gravity failing again. He paused near a junction and tapped a series of commands into the panel. Behind him, he heard metal footsteps, measured, light. One of them. Sabin toggled the recalibration switch. The local field stuttered. Optical interference surged. The Threx behind him froze mid-step. Its eyes flickered, then shut down completely. Sabin turned slowly, knife drawn. The alien turned its head at the sound, tracking the air, not the shape. Too late. Sabin crossed the gap and buried the blade under its jaw, piercing through soft plating and into the neural spine. The Threx twitched once, then dropped like a puppet with its strings cut. Sabin pulled the blade free, wiped it without looking. He moved faster now. The alarms changed pitch again. Sector Technical 2 was ahead, one of the few areas still running on auxiliary grid. Sabin routed power into the corridor's containment frame, then dragged a body into the corner. He wasn't sure whose, uniform shredded, too much blood. He didn't check the pulse. He opened his comm and overrode the encryption layer. Then he spoke. The voice wasn't his. It belonged to the Threx commander he'd executed in Deck 9, scraped from the last audible transmission. He spliced the sample into the intercom system. A single phrase. Low, commanding, urgent. Priority relocate. Technical hub. Confirm assist. He looped it twice, then stopped transmitting. A minute passed, then movement. A Threx broke from a side passage and charged toward the sector, blade arm extended. Saban stood to the side, unseen in the shadows. At the exact second the alien crossed the center line of the containment field, Saban hit the trigger. The magnetic seal snapped shut. The barrier was tuned to full charge. The Threx hit the barrier and vanished between two walls. Instant. Saban reset his grip and kept walking. He checked the uplink again. Still no signal from Ilera. No thermal feed. No routing pings. No system inputs. Nothing. Only the hum of dead circuits. He rerouted through 2 secondary bands. Still dead. He moved back through a side corridor, climbed a maintenance shaft, and emerged near the communications relay, one of the first fallback stations they had mapped together. Empty. The consoles were powered, but the relay logs were blank. No activity. He checked the analog feed. The emergency beacon was still transmitting from the shelter, but the temperature reading was flat. 0. Saban stopped moving. His eyes locked on the display for a long second. Then he backed away, fast. He dropped into a lower duct, past 2 lifeless crew members in diplomat robes, didn't stop, didn't look. He took a sharp turn into a collapsed systems hallway, rerouted again into engineering conduits. There, finally, he found a trace. Not a signal, not a ping. Pressure. Dust displaced against a panel. Residual warmth on the corner of a railing. Pressure points in the floor tile, too recent to be drift. Saban dropped to one knee. He pressed his palm flat. Warm. His eyes scanned upward, pipes misaligned. Control panel lit, but locked. Someone had passed through. Someone not Threx. He followed. The Seraphine groaned around him. Metal screamed down the corridor behind him. Bulkheads slamming closed without warning. Alarms triggered by phantom diagnostics. Flames flickering from vent lines. The structure was collapsing faster than systems could predict. Still no Ilera. Still no voice. He climbed a cargo bay ladder, jumped onto a loose cable, and swung through a collapsed breach between decks. His body hit the floor hard. His hand, still wrapped, throbbed from the impact. He rolled to his side, stared into the dark. Then he opened the comm. His voice cracked. Respond. Not a whisper, not a request. Just wait. Then silence answered. He closed the channel, waited, breathed once, twice, no reply. He stood. No hesitation now, no time. He tracked the next sign. Light heat on a door frame, shifting cable positions. A set of scuff marks in a maintenance panel. He followed, not as a soldier, not even as a predator. The mission had changed, and something out there was about to learn what that meant. Saban burst through the last sealed hatch with a crash of shoulder against metal, landing in a skid that scraped blood from his knee and sparked across the fractured deck. He rolled once, caught himself on one elbow, and rose slowly, wincing. Ahead, the corridor opened into the central operations chamber, the heart of the Seraphine, or what was left of it. The command room had once been pristine, polished walls, high central displays, suspended interface columns. Now it was cracked, half-lit, filled with the debris of a ship dying by the second. Sections of the ceiling hung low, bent under ruptured support struts. Smoke pooled near the vents, dancing lazily through the fractured light. At the center, Ilera knelt. She was still, shoulders tense, arms pinned behind her by a binding cable looped around a damaged bulkhead panel. Her head was bowed forward, a slow tremble visible along her spine. The edge of a curved blade rested just under her chin, steady, precise. Behind her stood the last Threx, taller than the others by a full head, broader through the shoulders, with an armored carapace segmented in overlapping plates. Its limbs were reinforced by a skeletal exoframe, and the deep grooves across its chest pulsed with faint cyan light. Its faceplate had no eyes, only a ridged mask, ribbed for resonance. A low vibration echoed from its throat. Calculated. Focused. The Threx leader turned its head slightly as Sabin stepped into view. "So this is the predator they warned us about." Sabin didn't answer. He didn't move. His body trembled just slightly from effort. Blood traced down his left arm, dark and sticky, dripping from his fingertips. His shoulders hung uneven. One leg dragged slightly behind the other, and his breathing came in controlled short draws. But his eyes, those stayed sharp. They scanned the room once. Tools, wreckage, nothing loose enough, nothing sharp, except for one thing. A metal rod, wedged into the side panel of a flickering console. Maintenance grade, dull silver, no polish, handle worn from use. Sabin took one step forward. The Threx pressed the blade tighter against Ilara's throat. A single drop of red formed and slid down her neck. "One move and she dies," the creature said, voice deep, resonant, without fear. "You're fast, but not that fast." Sabin paused. He tilted his head slightly, studied the blade, the grip, the spacing, the position of Ilara's shoulder, the angle of the leader's foot. The Threx tilted its head in return. "This isn't about her," it said, tone dipping into something like amusement. "It's about being useful again." Sabin's mouth twitched, not a smile, just a flicker of something dry and worn. "You talk too much." And then he moved. The Threx hurled Ilara to the side, spinning to meet Sabin's charge. Sabin's shoulder hit its ribcage at full momentum, knocking them both back into a bank of consoles. The impact crumpled the outer panels. Sparks exploded from ruptured wiring. Ilara hit the ground hard and rolled into cover, disappearing behind a mound of fallen girders. Sabin and the Threx leader separated, both recovering at the same time. The Threx surged first. Its blade whipped out in a horizontal arc. Sabin ducked low, the blade missing by inches. He came up fast and drove a punch into the Threx's side. His knuckles cracked against armor. No give. The Threx countered with a knee to his gut. The air left Sabin's lungs in a grunt, and he was thrown backward. He slammed into a terminal, rolled to a crouch. The Threx was already on him. They locked again, blade against forearm, elbow into jaw, body against body. The alien moved with efficiency, strength. It had been trained for this. Sabin was faster, but it was fresher. The fight slammed them into the floor, then the wall, then back to the center of the chamber. The Threx got a hand around Sabin's throat, lifted him. His feet scraped against the metal. Ilara, behind the collapsed console core, crawled forward. Her fingers found the emergency access panel. It was still intact. She yanked it open. Inside, a gravity override. One switch. She didn't hesitate. The lights across the chamber blinked, then dimmed, and gravity died. The Threx foot lost traction. Its grip loosened by half a second. It was all Sabin needed. He twisted, kicked off the Threx's chest with both legs, and pushed backward into a barrel roll. The two of them drifted apart, rotating slowly in the zero gravity. Sabin grabbed the nearest railing and launched himself toward the maintenance panel. His hand closed around the shaft. Heavy, rough, solid. He used the momentum to spin. The Threx turned in time to see the arc. The rod connected with the alien's jaw. The impact echoed like a hammer against iron. The Threx reeled. Sabin kept moving. He circled around, small thrusts from his boots one after another, timed, controlled. The alien adjusted, charged. Sabin threw the rod. The Threx caught it. But that had been the goal. As the alien braced, Sabin used a loose panel to kick forward, both knees colliding with the Threx's chest. They tumbled together. The rod slipped free, tumbling in a lazy arc. Sabin grabbed it mid-spin, reversed the grip, and slammed it down into the Threx's shoulder joint. The armor cracked. He struck again. A second time. The third hit didn't stop at the armor. It crushed what was underneath. The Threx lashed out. One claw caught Sabin across the ribs. He grunted, rolled, came up under the alien, and locked his arm around the Threx's throat. They spiraled across the room, tangled in limbs, blood, heat. Saban drove the rod into the side of the alien's neck, twisted hard, and used his foot against the wall to leverage both their bodies toward the central console. The alien's head struck first. A wet crack, silence, then a final twitch, and the Threx leader floated limp. Saban drifted back, eyes locked on the still body. He hovered, unmoving, then pushed off gently, crossed to Elira. She was upright now, one arm pressed to her ribs. Her face was pale, hair matted to her forehead, but she was breathing. He extended a hand. She took it. He pulled her to her feet, slow and uneven. One breath, one balance. Then they stood, surrounded by floating debris, smoke, and the last echoes of violence. Saban looked around. Only the hum of the failing systems remained. "You volunteered," he said softly. Elira didn't speak. "As I did." He let the words hang, then looked down at her again. "Glad you made it." She nodded. No smile, just the weight of survival. They stood there, two figures in the wreckage, breathing, together. And for the first time, maybe, not alone. Hey there, space human. I'm really curious about your thoughts on this video. Drop a quick comment and let me know what's on your mind. Or just say hi if you prefer. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. Oh, and one last thing. Every great soldier knows that to survive and become a hero, taking care of yourself is key. So before you go, check the pinned comment. Trust me, it's important. And I've chosen another video for you to watch. Just click the card here, or here if you want the whole playlist. See you there.